Assalamu alaikum. You can hear me. The mic is picking me up, right, in the back? Okay. This is my first talk in Pakistan. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I've been to Karachi before, but that was for the ecological agriculture stuff. Let me see. A tendency, 45 minutes, right, Naman? Isn't that what you said? I'm a well-trained student, and so I always ask and always go beyond my time. I'm tremendously grateful to Naman Naqvi for giving me the opportunity to speak at this new university. Happy birthday, Habib. Naman was himself a student at my university, Colombia. He was never my student, but I knew him well. There is no greater joy than the success of a former student as teacher. Therefore, although he was not directly my student, I take institutional pride in his achievement. I know he is serious in desiring to produce a very special kind of morally enabled, high-achieving student body to heal society. I have often said that the task of a humanities teacher is to provide an uncoercive rearrangement of desire. In my talk this morning, I will therefore offer to rearrange the good desires reflected in this attempt to found an unusual university by making room for a dangerous supplement. Sorry? It's cool? For making room for a dangerous supplement, the element of incalculability that can, at any moment, change everything. 50 years of institutional teaching, and this is the beginning of my 50th year of full-time university teaching. I was fortunate. I was fortunate enough to become a tenure-track assistant professor at the age of 23 in 1965, fall 1965. 50 years of institutional teaching has brought me this lesson. Try to learn how to teach this group. For me, the two ends of the spectrum. For me, there is no generalized idea of students. For me, the two ends of the spectrum, Columbia University in the city of New York and 6 elementary schools on the border between West Bengal and Jharkhand. Everything I say, I have 2 jobs, everything I say will be marked by this. Our subcontinental relationship is marred by legalized and illegal murder and rape, always the accompaniment of war. Some years ago, because of a travel agent's ignorance, I had an overnight layover in this very city. I was put in horrible unsanitary lodgings, as we would no doubt put any unfortunate Pakistani traveler on a layover in India. By mid-evening, 2 altogether uneducated men came forward saying, "Sister, here is some uglava pani that we keep in hand for tea. It's hot but clean. You can drink it." This is regional humanism. In Bangladesh in the 80s, I used to work at night schools for Zafrullah Chaudhry. Although the Abrahamic is sacrificial, there was not enough money for meat except for Qurban. I like meat and would happily eat a portion, but for my female companions, again, uneducated, landless croppers who would say, "Sister, we are eating beef, fine. Why are you ruining your religion?" I do not think of religious dietary restrictions as anything but historical. But in the face of this fierce regional humanism, I stopped. This is not a humanism based on the straight male with property. This is where, thank you, at least a lone woman laughs. This is not a humanism based on the straight male with property. This is where the human being holds the same body. "Sister, drink. sister, don't eat. The story is different in the ruling class, and I'm very glad for what Nauman said about Macaulay, because to an extent our task is to ask, are we proving him right? And that is why the post-colonial could be now. The story is different in the ruling class at the top. The mind is made differently, even if the body is the same. There is another bit of history that I want to teach and touch. I understand that this fledgling university has a special relationship with Texas A&M University in Qatar. The presence of such universities in West Asia does nothing to ameliorate the unacceptable labor practices, part of international news, which becomes more and less prominent as the world turns. I'm not a naysayer. I think relationships with metropolitan universities should be fostered, as we want to get a foothold in higher education of a sort, not necessarily similar to colonial liberal institutions. And I know what I'm speaking about. My BA is from Presidency College, Calcutta, and I was not educated abroad. But I must emphasize my idea of affirmative sabotage of what we have inherited from the colonial past or the global present. Do not accuse, do not excuse, but enter the protocols of what you are using and constructively critiquing at once, so you can occupy the point where what you are critiquing harbors something that may transgress its negative aspects, so you can turn it around for use and be useful for what you're using. This is a complicated thing. No accusation, but it's a method that you can teach. No accusation, but no excusing. But getting into the protocols of what you're using and critiquing so that you can locate yourself in the transgressive moment and turn it around. You have to know what you are critiquing. My teacher, Paul Deman, said to Fred Jameson, Fred, you can only deconstruct what you love. You can only deconstruct what you love. Today, it's just become a kind of sexy word for analysis, breaking things apart. That's not what it means. No accusing, no excusing. Entering the protocols intimately of what you're critiquing and using. No bad faith. Critiquing and using. Locating its moment of transgression. Turning it around for use. Affirmative sabotage rather than just destructive sabotage, which is bad faith because you will continue to use it. I would say to Nauman that this is a more complicated position than regionalism. It is constructively global. In the global, modernity is resituated as the contemporary. Let us hold on to this for the moment. I hope I can come back to it. I taught at the University of Texas, Austin from 1978 to 1982. Texas occupies a very special place in my heart. Walking Wounded from the 60s, wonderful music, and so on. And because I care about what happens to the US University, I'm inside there, outside in the teaching machine. Because I care about what happens to the US University as it corporatizes, I will say here what I have said to the World Economic Forum, where, as Nauman mentioned, I'm a member of the Council on Values. I quote myself, "The World Economic Forum is dedicated to improving the world. We cannot improve our world top-down. The new social covenant proposed by the World Economic Forum has potential for realizing this. Its itemized list calls for the rearrangement of desires. For it begins with agreement on basic universal," this is the richest people in the world now suddenly, for it begins with "so chuhe khakar billi haj ko chali." That's what this is, yes? For it begins with agreement on basic universal ethical values and continues with, I quote them, "the promotion of human well-being, happiness, flourishing, and equality of freedom to live a valued life. Although it also imposes practical tasks," said I to them. "These last are directed toward corporate and nation-state policymakers and may be done by other methods. But even here, the desires at the top must be generally changed so that the prime emphasis changes in turn from sustaining economic development. And the broad ones, the philosophical ones, definitely require going beyond the usual knowledge management techniques. Knowledge management techniques, very powerful because speedy, but existentially impoverished. Perhaps we should have separated them into two different categories. One, talking the talk, basic human values. The other, walking the walk, good jobs for non-graduates, strong technical education opportunities, apprentice schemes, a proactive tax and incentive system, and 21st century industrial strategy, all part of their covenant. One cannot walk the walk by merely agreeing to do so. It is a collective decision. Changing laws do not change minds, not merely something enforced from the top. You have to learn, I said to them, the habit of thinking about other people as equal but not the same. Exactly the situation between the reading student and the writer who produced the literary work. Equal but not the same. In the ethical rather than the merely responsible sections, we must understand that real knowledge depends on cooking the soul slowly. Cooking the soul with slow learning, not the instant soup of a one-size-fits-all toolkit. It's a very important word with knowledge management. The world is not populated by humanoid drones, although supposedly we are trying to become more, if the Economist is to be believed. The world, more like humanoid drones. The world is not populated by humanoid drones. You cannot produce a toolkit for a moral metric, or if you do, you will be disappointed. So this contingent stuff that can undo institutional planning is something that we must always keep in mind. We call it the future interior, the undecidability of what lies around the corner. The needs I have described are reflected in the world-famous journalist Thomas L. Friedman's mistake in the New York Times. He writes about the difference between 2013 and the world of today, 2014, and I quote him, "The world of disorder is expanding against the world of order," he writes. He mentions refugee children from collapsing Central American countries, major Ebola outbreak in West Africa, and now the first case in my neighborhood in New York, straining governments, jihadists carving out a caliphate inside Iraq and Syria, Russia eating Crimea and taking more bites out of Ukraine, and cites the United Nations announcement that the number of refugees, this is quotation by him from UN, the number of refugees, asylum seekers, and internally displaced people worldwide has, for the first time in the post-World War II era, exceeded 50 million people. I have traveled since mid-May in Turkey, Austria, France, the United Kingdom, Poland, India, and other places in the more recent trip. Perhaps with the exception of Poland, I could add the rise of right-wing governments to Friedman's list. South Africa could add its own, and so on. After citing his list, however, Friedman makes a major mistake. He correctly describes freedom from as national independence, and I think Nauman correctly pointed out that national liberation is not a revolution. It's the beginning of problems because of this class apartheid from before. Friedman correctly describes freedom from as national independence, but he incorrectly describes freedom to as, I quote him, the freedom to live your life, speak your mind, start your own political party, build your own business, vote for any candidate, pursue happiness, and be yourself, whatever your sexual, religious, or political orientation. End of quote. This is a good American list, but it is based on the more fundamental freedom to think of dissimilar others as equal. Democracy has a contradiction at its heart, which will not go away. Autonomy for myself, but the understanding that others completely dissimilar to myself are equal. It is with the, wait a second now, yes, this is why I chose, in my own home state of West Bengal, as title for the last Netaji oration, Freedom After Independence, ? This is the profound contradiction within democracy, as I said, autonomy, freedom from, liberty, and others, freedom to, equality, us and them. The World Economic Forum's new social covenant wants to perform that movement and therefore requires the literary as training for the ethical, as a method. For ethics as such cannot be practiced after business, or the business of medicine as triage has been sustained. Ethics are unconditional, and since they're very faith-based, Judeo-Christian, I said, I'm not religious, although I believe in the sacred, the ethics are unconditional, and I said to them, God demands the sacrifice of your son, he stays your hand, and your unconditional ethical commitment is turned into a covenant, circumcision of the male body into a circumcision of the heart. This is the end of what I said to the World Economic Forum. But it's a long thing, it's just a quote. It is with the intention of slow cooking the soul that in the post-colonial nations, some of us propose regional humanism in higher education. This requires a radical interrogation of the notion of contemporary post-coloniality. Colonialism in our area is a historical matter. In the metropolitan countries such as Britain, the United States, or the European Union, upward class mobility conscious immigrants speak of post-colonialism today. Strictly speaking, a misnomer. I wrote a book criticizing this phenomenon, which you mentioned in 1999. It is called A Critique of Post-Colonial Reason, and in fact, that heavy-duty title, because the first chapter is on Kant, was imposed on me by my homeboy, Amartya Sen. My title was, Don't Call Me Post-Colonial. And Amartya, who was at the time on the syndics of Harvard University Press, called me and said, Gayatri, your book is very serious. Do not give it a frivolous title. I didn't think that was a frivolous title. But at any rate, he said, you write on Kant, call it Critique of Post-Colonial Reason. And, one is scared of, older dadas. So it went. So it was called A Critique of Postcolonial. Whatever the problems with diasporic postcolonialism, it has no place in the modernity of the old colonies today. As more and more metropolitan universities, quote, globalize today, our postcolonialism, especially cultural postcolonialism, often unexamined, becomes another way of avoiding the problem of class apartheid that our subcontinent shares with the rest of the world, for the globalized US, British, European educational institutions to feel that they are helping the world by relaxing their own quality control and making money on the side. The campuses outside, right? Relaxing quality control and making money. It is a way of defining the North and the South as, quote, global, and thus keeping the real problem of our subcontinent, class apartheid in education, we'll say it many times, because I know what I'm talking about, as you mentioned, 30 years, alive and undisturbed. We should refuse this interpellation. Hey you, that's interpellation, right? I'm going to read a little bit of Althusser. Many people in this audience know it, but some may not. We should refuse this interpellation and claim complicity with them in the root sense, folded together, not conspiracy or underhanded stuff. But I'm a language person, right? So, as I say, a Europeanist, English, French, and German, those are my languages. Complicity, folded together. So with these modern masters, we should refuse the interpellation of global and claim complicity in the root sense. In higher education, we are folded together with the US, etc., not to be interpolated by them as global, the new code word for the third world, which in itself was not a word that operated for very long after Bandung. The French philosopher Louis Althusser wrote, I quote the English translation, "Interpellation can be imagined along the lines of the most commonplace everyday police hailing, 'Hey, you there!' Assuming that the theoretical scene I have imagined," Althusser writes, "takes place in the street, the hailed individual will turn around." Althusser is describing Complicity. The hailed individual will turn around. By this nearly 180-degree physical conversion, the word conversion is being used literally here, turning together, conversion, turning together with the interpellator, the individual becomes a subject, writes Althusser. Why? Because he, in his case it's he, has recognized that the hail was really addressed to him, and that it was really him who was hailed and not someone else. But in reality, these things happen without any succession. The existence, Althusser writes, of ideology and the hailing or interpellation of individuals as global as anything, as other, as subjects are one and the same thing. I feel proud of Nauman when he invokes Yosin, thoughtful self-calculation, or cites Buland ka jaane main kaun. Like him, I too interrogate the wisdom of absolutist secularism. However, I am obliged to say that these readings may be produced by metropolitan interpellation as alternative rather than oppositional. And I know there are students of English here, this is Raymond Williams. Alternative rather than oppositional, global, and can only be understood as supplementary to a metropolitan education with room for criticism of its colonial production. Again, I think Nauman did a good job of that. Anthropology, sociology, political science, and more. When I teach at Columbia, I'm myself part of such an education. Indeed, there are some who say that with my ally and friend, the late Edward W. Said and Homi K. Bhabha, I am a founder of this trend, often given the name Post-Colonial, a name your conference carries. As I have already mentioned, a critique of post-colonial reason was already critical of this tendency. Recently, Mahmoud Mutman has written well on the problem of this approach in The Politics of Writing Islam. For, given the persistent structures of social relations millennially present, long before colonialism, present in the sector below the class frontier, Nauman's eloquent words can lead to an unscrupulous use of the idea of homeland, heritage, and history to justify xenophobic tyranny and the doctrine of religious purity, above as below. And the use is often made by politicians, for the greatest number of votes are to be found below the class frontier. This is why, even as higher education welcomes collaboration with North American universities, basically for reproducing the class apartheid secured by colonialism, if unquestioned, if we are serious about regional humanism, we are obliged to face the fact that the nature of education, higher and or lower, does not promote critical intellectual labor by itself. It therefore produces a conviction that rape culture and bribe culture are normal, and I will give you examples. This obligation to break the class apartheid and to see education holistically, not to compartmentalize higher education, is to put our money where our mouth is, and this is easily ignored. When non-governmental organizations speak of children's education, they are certainly not speaking of insertion into the habits, of the intuitions, of that aporia, the contradiction, the double bind in democracy between liberty for me and equality with others, completely unlike me. The state of Norway has recently decided to adjudicate amity between our two countries by dividing the Nobel Prize in the interest of children's education. A great thing, but it is an extreme example of solving all problems with giving money. An alternative to this is giving equipment. It's like, remember, feminists in this room, our old slogan, it's like a fish with a bicycle. Giving equipment with no training, where it is a woman from something called First Class or something, based in Washington, asked me, having found out about my schools, you know, we can give you anything you need, chalkboards, this, that. And I said, sorry, we don't need anything. Because what we really need is, of course, people trained into this other way of thinking, and that she cannot produce. You don't teach with chalkboards. You can write in the dust. An alternative is giving equipment. Whatever we may think of humanism as we struggle under the burden of the Anthropocene, that is to say, the Earth's extinction hastened by human activity, such an effort would not qualify as humanistic. Let us look for a moment at the significance of gender below the class frontier by a grotesque travesty of education. B.R. Ambedkar, the great Dalit leader who took on Gandhi at the writing of the Indian Constitution, famously wrote that the general rule of human group formation was based in the difference between the treatment of surplus men and surplus women. This was a person who had suffered through the caste system, but he was enough identified with the problem and not stupid. And so therefore, instead of saying caste is race, he went on to give to this problem which had made him suffer a gendered explanation. I repeat, the general rule of human group formation was based in the difference between the treatment of surplus men and surplus women. At a seriously established metropolitan university, namely the University of Cambridge, I suggested in February that the access to humanness had the structure of rape, and therefore real education must dehumanize. That radical argument requires care and time to establish, and consequently, I will not present it here. I need, however, to remind you that whatever I say about humanism to be immediately accessible, this particular radical resituating of the human is always on my mind. Enough said. Let us return to Ambedkar's excellent youthful insight. The general rule of human group formation is the different arrangement of the management of surplus men and surplus women. If we consider the adequate definition of woman to be procreative and to be in the service of men, then use of women over and above these obligations can define them as, quote, surplus, and lead to their destruction. This baseline formula can account for almost all the injustice against women, the envy going across class formation, its crisis manageable by the sub-definitions as possession of father, husband, son, accounting also for the ideology of mother infatuation, as the Algerian feminist writer Assia Jabar has powerfully argued. This particular narrative has no special connection to colonialism. I have argued elsewhere that this is the tacit global before the globe was conceived of in scientific cartography. I have connected it to reproductive heteronormativity, suppressed in the sphere of male-dominated thinking in the autonormativity of the idea. The idea is identical with itself, no difference. The idea is identical with itself, and we get it millennially. It is always true, not historical, not heteronormative. Suppressed in the sphere of male-dominated thinking in the autonormativity of the idea. This is why I was talking about the dangerousness of the incalculable. Again, because this argument takes care in the establishment, and because I have discussed it in great detail in many of my writings, I will not develop it here, but suggest that the post-colonial focus sometimes is obliged to ignore this universality of the rule of group formation, the difference in the treatment of surplus men and surplus women indigenous to our unexamined culturalisms, with surplus defined with utmost brutality and violence. Many years ago, we read Walter Rodney's How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. not only to avoid this particular loophole that I just mentioned, but also to accommodate the specific features of globalization rather than colonialism, I am proposing that that story, although signaling a rupture, the coming of the colonizers, could take hold because it is also a displacement of the general practice of previous dispensations. The idea that colonizers are bad and the colonized are good and have cultural stuff that has to be re-excavated now is an unexamined golden ageism. And I've been talking about it now, so I won't repeat. So I'm proposing that the story, although signaling a rupture, the coming of the colonizers, could take hold because my friend Gauri Vishwanathan, whose dissertation I read, she was directed by Edward, wrote Masks of Conquest, which is very popular in the United States. It is celebrating its 25th anniversary. But even when I read it as a dissertation, I said, Gauri, treat some of the vernacular languages, as I as you call it. Of course, I won't use that word. It's regional. But at any rate, I said, Gauri, look at some of the evidence in Indian languages. There was a lot of collaboration with all this education stuff. It's not just a mask of conquest. She didn't do it. So it remains very popular in the United States. But I think most serious people in our neck of the woods find that good as it is, it still needs supplementation in this way. We tend to ignore that. But Nauman didn't in his introductory remarks, and I'm proud of that. Benevolent or malevolent, or in between, or indeed not bothered to be violent, pre-colonial power groups, unevenly enriching themselves at the expense of the post-colonial groups inheriting older hierarchies, shares that logic. Now, is this my phone? I hope not. It sometimes is. This gives us, in fact, I was talking in Japan to a huge crowd at Hitotsubashi University, and suddenly my phone rang, and I knew it was the 14th of July, and I knew it was not the ghost of the French Revolution, but that it was my sister, because she alone had my number, and my niece was pregnant with her first child, an intellectual and international campaigner for the Pesticide Action Network, who had said to me when she was pregnant, Mashi, I despise it. The hormones are kicking in. I can think of nothing but this child. So I thought it was she. So I took the call. And to this day, Hitotsubashi University thinks, since I spoke to my sister in Bengali, that call was staged. So therefore, I always ask, was it my phone? Well, to go back. So this gives us a pre-modern clue to the word underdevelopment as it spread to varieties of class apartheid present in all polities when the colonizers came in, cutting across gender apartheid and group apartheid, where the usual overflowing of something like, quote, class in the everyday must be allowed to contaminate the class-specific house of academic postcolonialism. It is not individualistic to teach elite and subaltern proletarian to think in a complicit, folded together, and gendered manner that development is not necessarily tied to that Euro-sequential truism, colonizer, independence, modernization, now culturalism, that interested underdevelopment rather than development has forever made the world turn, that it inhabits the persistent structures of contemporary globality, that rogue capitalization, as it is now indicated by more and more people at the center, could inhabit those structures not only as rupture, as we would like to believe, but as repetition of what was there already before. The World Bank won because the moneylenders charged very unfair, supposedly is the World Bank fair. Now that the BRICS have established another World Bank, we will have to ask that question again. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. There's a new World Bank and a new IMF. Ask me again next year and you'll hear something else. Anyway, so the rogue capitalization, as it is now indicated by more and more people at the center, could inhabit those structures not only as rupture, but as repetition. I am asking us to allow the concept of development to overflow the interplay of capital and colony. This makes room for an acknowledgement of complicity, folded togetherness, rather than see development to be conceptualized as good or evil or both after colonialism. I am asking for us to see that development as sustainable underdevelopment has a longer history, and perhaps even that this history is beginning to make itself visible as the pattern of globalization explodes economic growth into developing inequality. I am suggesting that the conceptualization of development must be unevenly interdisciplinary. Statistics and political science folded together, complicit with the disciplines of subject formation, the humanities. See, the schools where I teach, as I say, I go there to repay ancestral debts. They know nothing about colonialism. Even in the United States, as people know, younger people don't really have a memory of Vietnam. Educated Indians between 18 and 25 do not remember the genocide of 2002. So how can we expect these illiterate people to remember colonialism? But they certainly remember, and very well, the cognitive crime perpetrated by ourselves, the caste Hindus, upon them. So therefore, those old structures, in fact, are coming back as, where I teach, they've never seen white people. The first time Ben Baer went, they thought he was an albino. So this is not a joke that I'm making here. So therefore, I'm suggesting that this conceptualization of development must become unevenly interdisciplinary. Globalization requires a change in ourselves as instruments of knowing. Those wonderful historical approaches, quote, culture wars approaches, critiques of Eurocentrism approaches, the modernity tradition approaches, the post-colonial approaches will not serve if you are doing the contemporary as such. That is the epistemological challenge. How do we construct our objects of knowledge now in the moving global now time? I quote Benjamin, of course, global now time as it flashes up. To consolidate these points, I want to suggest to Nauman that I would like to be given the permission to supplement his good vision of regional humanism, which in turn can supplement collectively the ambition of the United States and Europe to re-establish its hold upon us in the Asian century as our benevolent globalizers, giving us science and technology and encouraging our class to consolidate identitarianism with the regionalism that recognizes our own role in consolidating the sustained underdevelopment of our own civilizations. You have shown us the extraordinary and impressive architecture of your wonderful new university, and I congratulate you. Remember, I am with you in utilizing this brilliant built space in the development of our class. But I would like to show you, and now the PowerPoint, the third shot. But I would like to show you the structure where I slept exactly a week ago, the office building of the 6 schools that I have been running now for many decades in my home state of West Bengal. The notes didn't come on somehow, so I will tell you. I do this not because I'm an identitarian, but because this teaching cannot be done in a language other than the mother tongue of the children, and in order to teach the state curriculum, including mathematics in this language, I had no alternative but to use my mother tongue, which in its foundations I know better than I do English. Now this structure was built by my co-workers, formerly landless illiterate scheduled caste, scheduled tribe. They took from me interest-free loans, which they immediately repaid with salary cuts. No baiting with microcredit here. They immediately repaid with salary cuts, and then this building became our office building. It's quite comfortable. It's got a hard bed. It's got an attached bathroom, no flushing toilet, but that's cool. And, you know, and that tree there was a tree that was planted to commemorate Wangari Maathai. I believe that's the only tree planted in rural Bengal or perhaps rural India to commemorate her. I was at the University of Nairobi 5 days after her death, and I promised that I would build a tree in my hometown, New York, and in rural Bengal. The hometown New York was very lavish, the commissioner for the parks and so on and so forth. People came from Kenya, etc. But this one, I have left my signature on here because the tree is a bokul. And the wonderful Bangladeshi poet Farhad Mazhar, who is a philosopher of agriculture, an ecological agriculturalist, a pharmacist, a poet, and an intellectual, is kind enough to have written a couple of books of poems dedicated to me. Everyone is competitive with Binoy Mujumdar. Some may know this. In this audience, that name has no recognition. But at any rate, he has written, and one of them is called Darodi Bokul. Dard. Darodi Bokul, because the tree is big, but on the other hand, it grows flowers. This is his understanding of me. I don't think I'm all that full of dard, as you can see, but that's Farhad. So I planted a bokul. It's my signature. No one will know it, but only my audiences to whom I say this. And so this, there is my wonderful office building. And that's what I'm talking about. I mean, as I said, I slept there exactly a week ago, comfortably and happily, with our new supervisor, and it's wonderful. She's a young Muslim woman whom they have chosen themselves. You know, they choose the people, and I was delighted to see, although I didn't make much of it, that, you know, they had chosen Nasrun Khatun, who is a wonderful Uच्च Madhyamik higher secondary graduate, and she and I slept together, and I said to her parents, she'll be protected, she'll sleep in my room. So at any rate, I would like to begin, and first shot, please. I would like to begin with my friend, Professor Abiola Irele. This is why I said to you I like provosts. He's a provost. I would like to begin with my friend, Professor Abiola Irele, because I want to insist that the work of counter-global education, so that we can present a world to supplement the globe, should not, in fact, be confined to the limits of our mother tongues. It's the limit of my ignorance, nothing else. I have therefore tried to work in Africa. I continue to do so. Funnily enough, you know, I was in Lagos and in Ilorin, Nigeria, and Ghana quite recently. I come back, and in New York, in my neighborhood, there is Ebola. I had no problem there because they were taking very good protective measures. Anyway, I have therefore tried to work and continue to do so in Africa, where the wealth of mother tongues is inaccessible to me, with the establishment of a database of those mother tongues that were not consolidated by the missionaries in the 19th century, post-colonial in that sense. Today, of course, it's not a problem, but a wealth, because orality can go directly to digitality, whereas they used those confining colonial disciplines and destroyed the movement, the flexibility of the languages by making them into named languages with orthography and so on and so forth. At a small rural university in Nigeria called the Kwara State University, located in Ilorin, with Professor Irele as provost and my friend and ally, and a visionary vice-chancellor named Abdul Rashid Nalla. I have also tried to work with bringing together, and continue to do so, East and West Africa, which Africa is very regionalist, in an acknowledgement that women's narratives have something to teach us in the rural-urban interface created by the axis of misused wealth in these countries. I invoke Professor Irele, don't take him away, put him back, first shot. I invoke Professor Irele, my good friend and ally, because unlike the monolithic descriptions of the global north, Africa by itself does not indicate this new definition of globality, just as we, the Asian elite, do not. This picture of Biola, where, although he's an African, he's shown as belonging to the same academic class as does Kancha Ilaiah, the Dalit intellectual in India, retired professor of political science at Osmania University in Hyderabad. The academy is an instrument of upward class mobility, and we must recognize that. This man shares the same academic culture. We went to school every day. That is cultural formation. from kindergarten onto this institution, and that is a culture. It doesn't have a nation-state name, but it is so. Let us now descend to the formation of the real subaltern intellectual. Now we can show the second picture and go down quickly. This is my female teachers at the housewarming for the office building, myself in the back, the housewarming for the office building that I just showed. So you can see they're happy. And I have a different kind of rule for my schools. Building after school. Okay, so you'll see there's only one building and the other one I'm not going to show because you'll hear. But the one building, because the female teacher there, Rekha Maji, who's sitting right here, she proved that for 2 years she ran a school which was like a school. And who gave me the land? Nobody, but 4 landless, illiterate people who went on their own. They had no land to cultivate, but 4 of them could give me 1 kata, 720 square feet. They gave this, they went to Shuri, they wrote a thing, they wrote a dalil in which they gave me and my co-worker, a white Englishman, land. History was turned around. No so-called untouchable Chotalok scheduled caste has ever given anything to a Brahmin and an Englishman. I stood there. This is a mind change. This is a mind change. I stood there telling myself, Gayatri, don't be sentimental. No tears now. Treat this as normal. Things have changed. So, you know, and that's where her school is built. You will see it. Okay, descent. The next one. Next shot. No, this one you saw. Next shot. Okay, this is me. The last day, I'm way there in the back. Okay, this is in the office building. It's big enough, that thing, for this seminar. Now, this is a seminar, 1 hour and 50 minutes, just with a little tea break inside, exactly like a Columbia seminar. This is a pedagogic practicum with students. These are the students and teachers. The female teachers are way there, and Nasrun is sitting right next to me because she's new. So these people are, in fact, learning from me exactly in the same way as I teach at Columbia. And what, in fact, as I tell them, and this is the truth, what I say, let's say, at Utrecht, when I'm asked to speak to Keynote, the 300th anniversary of the Peace of Utrecht by University of Utrecht, is learned by learning to learn from these cognitively damaged people, damaged by us. And so, to an extent, this exchange has taught me so much that I have the courage to question some positions from within, good positions from within our class, because of this situation. So that's the class. Carry on. Let's go to the next one. Okay, this is the schoolroom, and I'm training the teachers and supervisors here. There's Nasrun right next to the door. So these people, I have 2 supervisors, all chosen by them, and I believe 8 teachers, and I train them in the classroom by teaching, and then after class, half an hour every session, and then at the end, the 1 hour, 50 minutes, and then we eat together, agriculture, etc. You'll see a picture of the agriculture thing, but I'll go fast. And then next one. Next one. Here's the schoolroom with the teachers, and you see I'm hidden by the children there, and then in the corner is the female teacher sitting, and here are students in front. Go on. Next one. Okay, this is Rashpur. This is Rashpur with the Shahawar with the female teacher standing behind me, but not good enough to rate a building yet. I keep saying, I want to give you a building, come on. But, you know, it won't happen until they're good enough. Okay, then. Okay, this is Rashpur again. And this is, I suppose, Rashpur again. Carry on. Okay, I'm talking. This is Langulia, and there's the Boydonatpur, female teacher behind the thing, behind the pole. Carry on. Okay, this is also Boydonatpur then. This is Langulia. Carry on. I'm not going to, Langulia again. Okay, these are the farmers. You see, the reason why I put this is steering committee. I mean, there are many, but this is a steering committee. The guy with the bald head who's investigating his toenail, for which he got thoroughly reprimanded by me. He is the head of the agricultural initiative, Ecological Agriculture. I wish I could tell you the whole story, because it's not easy to be ecological when you're that poor. But I will never do anything unless they begin to ask themselves. And so Shunil, the leader, has had only 4 years of schooling, only elementary school. He's forgotten everything, but he is very, very smart. And you see, the banyan tree is the classic place for farmers' meetings. So therefore, unfortunately, with my spine, I'm sitting on a wooden chair, but this is it. The women, I mean, I don't try to change them by telling them to do things. The women are very interested, sitting somewhat at a distance, and Nasrun is right there. And a real participant in this picture is the Indo-Gangetic Plain, which you can see in the distance. And certainly that's, we talk so much about the land when we do all of this, that we should consider it. And again, English students, it's like Hardy's Wessex. It is there, part of our effort. I have then, I think that's it, no? There's nothing after this. I have then 2 jobs. Columbia University, which gives me my salary, where I try to rearrange the desires of the children of the superpower, anxious to, quote, help the world, not knowing what it is to help, traveling with interpreters without questioning their own production, producing meaningless but vast statistics, and denying themselves the right to intellectual labor through digital idealism. Denying themselves the right to intellectual labor, mata khatano, we say in Bengali. The right to, and I say to it, this I think you will understand, although it's Bengali. I've been saying to them forever, and they understand this. Borolok, guys, borolok matha khataye. Chotolok, gotor khataye. Once you, and we have brought you up for manual labor, no right to intellectual labor. That's what I'm trying to change. I also say, do without me, I'm your enemy. Because, as I said, 2 generations do not undo thousands of years. Okay, I'll read on and finish. Anyway, so, and these 6 schools where I attempt to repay ancestral debt. In order to explain this, I've just said it, this new regionalist humanism, let me repeat that to the schools I say, I'm your enemy. I'm good and so were my parents, but 2 generations do not undo millennial cognitive crime. Therefore, try to do without me in future. At this point in time, the state might do things for you for my sake, not yours. However unwillingly, our intention is to rearrange this without violence. This is a so-called Maowadi area. But my teachers keep saying, we are not going to let violence enter this area. Education does make change if it is real, rather than top-down, the middle-class urban radicals coming in with the conviction that they know how to teach these battered epistemologies. That doesn't work. So, I mean, they say yes, 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 and smile because they've been trained up to say that to the benevolent feudals. Means nothing. In fact, we laugh after the Shantiniketanese leave. So on Monday, I will be taken to visit the Machara colony, one of Karachi's biggest Kachiyabadis with around 700,000 inhabitants. The majority of the community are Bengalis and Burmese. As these people are not considered Pakistanis due to their heritage, government intervention in the form of hospitals, schools, etc. is near to nothing. Your university is active in redressing the poverty there. The majority of the 700,000 people are children between the ages of 5 and 15. Almost each family has approximately 11 members, and every person from the age of 5 are employed in the fisheries or shrimp peeling factories, which are also a site of globalized capital, but I used to work with the Bhediwalas in Bangladesh, but let's keep to the time. Employed in the fisheries or shrimp peeling factories. This is excellent work. I myself have spoken of the Rohingyas all over the world as among the world's subalterns. Before Aung San Suu Kyi visited Colombia, at the request of Amnesty International, I arranged a high-level meeting of the leaders of the Rohingya movement, including such figures as Amartya Sen and Maung Zarni, which was, I believe, at the spearhead of the opening of international consciousness to this absurd and historical cruelty against ethnic Muslims. But the work I am talking about is not related to poverty or oppression alleviation in the short term, which is very necessary. Minds are not changed with a change in the law, where I also fight. I work with public interest litigation, etc. I'm not a naysayer, but to think that that's all there is and to praise yourself for it and to get celebrity through a website, that is a sadness, that is a mark of class apartheid. It is just that there be law, but law is not justice. I do not remember in class whether my students are rich or poor when I'm teaching. They are students and I'm their servant. And I acknowledge complicity with the forces that have kept them where they have been millennially. I try not only to solve problems for them, but to produce problem solvers so that the situation does not remain like this forever. Let me therefore continue quickly with my teaching load at these schools, each 7-day visit using more contact hours than one semester at Columbia University. I've already told you, where I ask the students at Columbia not to donate money, but their convenience, so that I can keep on working at the schools and teaching at Columbia with long makeup classes at Columbia without missing a class. My time is at an end. I have then suggested that even as we collaborate with metropolitan universities in order to establish an adequate ethical base to the use of science and technology among the already constituted lower middle class to the top, we must also produce in our own regions that humanism that recognizes that without the careful production of the subaltern intellectual as such, the largest sector of the electorate is kept incapable of helping in the establishment of social justice. They are not, and I vote in India. I'm a citizen of India, so that given the recent debacle, I know what I'm talking about. They are not only our beneficiaries, but our allies. And for this, the subalterns, we need to the largest sector of the electorate, we need to keep working for the establishment of a worldwide collectivity which will help in this work. It cannot be done in terms of large statistics. That's not how it is. If you want to build your body, you have to do physical exercise, which is this is why even with a spinal problem, I can stand up for over nearly an hour. This cannot be done with large statistics. In order to support large statistics, there has to be this kind of careful tending of the body. And do you think the mind is less complicated than the body? That's why I said slow cooking of the soul. So we must keep working for the establishment of a worldwide collectivity which will help in this work based on living human memory of the world's mother tongues, so that there can be a world and not only the globe. My last book began with, not my last book anymore, readings is out, the last one before, began with the statement that only capital and data globalize. Everything else is damage control. And I have tried today to explain those sentences, yet once again, given this opportunity by Naman. I do not think this is going to happen. But there is no other message that I can give you. You are building futures, and I can say that my humble words are directed toward philosophers of the future after the disaster. Now, this is not going to happen, but there is no other message that I can give you. And I can say to the younger generation present here, think about this. Remember, democracy is not just ourselves, but others unlike us. And do not let education join the Anthropocene in bringing closer the extinction of the earth. Thank you.